Very frustrating morning, David. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jason. I think we're going to have a great show.
Yes, I'm confident we will. Before we get underway with that, David, I have to share the regrettable news that our reach is being further reduced, very likely by perhaps a complaint or something from one of the usual suspects. But I've just received word that Crowdsource the Truth has been permanently and irrevocably kicked off of Facebook. And of course, they don't really tell me what prompted that, or, it just says that the account was disabled because it didn't follow our community standards. The thing that's interesting about this, David, is that they can change these community standards and you don't really have much of a choice. So I wonder if that's legal because they sort of induce you to becoming involved with their network by offering you all this free stuff. And then along the way, they can change the rules if they don't like what you're doing and then just throw you off. It's kind of un-American, David. You don't get to know what you're accused of, who your accusers are, no opportunity for appeal, no opportunity for redemption. And you know what? It's a little bit sad, David, because beyond limiting the many thousands of people who were previously watching us on Facebook from seeing us, they've also terminated my personal Jason Goodman account. That's 12 years of communications with friends in foreign countries and certain people I have no other contact with other than Facebook.
Well, they're operating a bait and switch operation using artificial intelligence algorithms. And so what they're doing is they're monitoring the conversation, semantics, non-semantic images that flow between you and your guests and your contacts to determine whether or not you're a threat to their underlying conspiracy, which is they're driving parallel narratives into the collective conscience of humanity, particularly, and the world's leading expert in that is the BBC, that, as you know, has a weekly audience of 500 million people in 50 languages. Right?
That they
So
do.
I think we're going to discover something that will horrify the average American about parallel narratives, which the BBC has perfected since and during World War II. Over to you.
And that, of course, is going to be our topic today. David, I've graffitied the BBC, I think in a pretty appropriate way, right next to former Secretary of State and I don't know, I guess probably four-star. He was a big, four right there on his shoulder. Four-star NATO General Alexander Haig. He's standing right next to the anarchy graffiti.
Yeah, and the work that we've been doing collectively, I've come up with that phrase some time ago about an online criminal insurgency directed by an online judicial elite. And I'm going to pick up on the parallel narrative in a minute, but the online criminal insurgency, we can now flesh it out. And it was derived, I believe, when Bill Clinton introduced that three strikes law in the 1993-1994 period. And the federal prison population has shot up from 92,000 around the time the three strikes legislation was introduced. I believe now it's 240,000.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest and most skillful practitioners of the role of three strikes in creating an online criminal insurgency is Kamala Harris, but I'll come back to that. So now, if we look at the parallel narrative idea, is maybe you could just flick to my new hat if you wouldn't mind, because
Oh,
I think
yeah.
that's
Well,
symbolically. Sorry, go ahead. I mean, if
no,
you
I was
want
just
me
going to
to.
say, I think the first thing that we should do, because when I showed the image earlier, I was covering it with your live video inset, but we've got a new hat for you today, David. It features the Captain Hawkins logo.
Yeah, well, I think now I didn't want to insult our listeners' intelligence or pander to the dark forces that are trying to destroy you by putting a period between each of those letters. So I'm not pretending to be a captain, certainly not a naval captain. But I suppose if you did put the periods, it would read C.A.P.T.A.I.N. which stands for Character and Parallel Tracking in Artificial Intelligence Narratives. And what that means is, and this goes back to my extraordinary experience back in Vancouver in 1981, where I was sent by Schlumberger as its representative in artificial intelligence and geoscience research. And I heard or saw and discussed with people there this idea of character tracking to understand narratives. And I don't know if the hairs on the back of your neck go up, but what that implies is something really sinister, because what they're saying is that they can program a fake character, if you will, with artificial intelligence algorithms to perform a fake narrative and then inject the behavior of the fake character or the fake narrative into real characters and real narratives, which I think lies behind these extraordinary techniques of deception that back in World War II they called the double cross operation, where, for example, the BBC would broadcast on a frequency just vacated by the German news programs with a frequency and a power that overwhelmed regional radio broadcasts in Germany, and told the Germans that the Nazi high command was evacuating Berlin of its elite, leaving the peasants to fry under British bombing raids. And apparently that was extraordinarily effective. And the fascinating thing is they were doing it with RCA technology in World War II. And the only thing that's changed, Jason, is that the BBC is now doing it with RCA after a name change, namely Serco. So today, the BBC and Serco and its contemporary in British Columbia called Maxar are actually generating parallel narratives which succeed in confusing the public in just about everything, including the East African embassy bombings and the present COVID infection. And let me just point out a parallel, and it does, I'm being extremely arrogant here. It does, I think, underline the importance of people who are thoughtful about this, listening to us carefully, because didn't we cover Neil Ferguson, right, the head of the COVID-19 response team at Imperial College, who was infected with COVID and went to visit Boris Johnson at number 10 Downing Street, right?
David, I've just received a direct threat via email while we're online, right here, right now. A threat from one of the social engineers. It's a direct threat from someone who alleges to have the ability to give me my stuff back. So they're threatening me directly now. And this is somebody who hides, this is a fake character who hides behind a fake name, now openly threatening me. We're not going to respond to that threat. We're not even going to give this person the credit of announcing who they are. I just want to let everybody know who's watching us right now. This is what's going on, David, and I'm sorry to interrupt your flow. But we've had the Vimeo channel attacked. We've had the YouTube channel attacked. We've now had the Facebook channel attacked. Is this death by 1,000 paper cuts? The best thing for people to do, David, is to join us on our sponsor exclusive program, which is going to be starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. See, David, these people are cowards. They don't have the courage to present truthful information, to meet with us as equals, where they present themselves, their credentials, their real names, where people know where they are so that they can be held accountable. What they do is they hide behind fake names, behind fake narratives. They insert fake news about you. They insert fake news about me. They issue cowardly threats. If I ever met this person, he would not say these things to me because he knows he wouldn't have the courage to stand in front of me and say these things. And he wouldn't walk away from a meeting like that. So, David, it's frustrating that you and I appear online. We put ourselves out here. They reveal your address. They reveal my address. They've brought these lawsuits. They're unrelenting with the lawsuits. When they realize they've failed with their stupid lawsuits, They try to get real law firms involved with the Emmys and things like this. Even the Emmys are cowards. They don't have, the president of television didn't contact me and tell me, hey, I believe you violated our copyright, take it down or else. He attacked the YouTube channel because he knew it would take it out. He wanted to reduce the reach right here, right before we're 33 or 32 days before this very important election. And these are people, David, who would rather destroy your livelihood and your reputation, destroy my livelihood and my reputation, and leave me homeless, and deny people the ability to hear information other than what they want them to hear. They want to control people's thoughts, just the way the BBC does, by injecting this fake news, even if that means the destruction of the United States, lies, people now cheering that the President of the United States has a potentially deadly disease. We're living in very disturbing times, David.
Yeah, and the gift that you and I have that I think is of great concern to the conspirators is that you, combined with my experience, are able to communicate what is, on first blush, extremely complex. I know that I've spoken to many, many people, many intelligent people, and I get into my groove, as you know, and it gets highly technical, and then their eyes glaze over, and they fall asleep. Apparently, I've got a nice, soothing voice, etc., etc. And that drives me mad because my message describes an existential threat to the survival of the Republic. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I've had 40 years in this business. So just going back to 1981, at that IJCAI, that's the International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence, I was the delegate sent by Schlumberger to that conference. There were probably 3,500 people, mainly computer scientists and AI researchers, and none of them that I met understood the dangers of programming computers with artificial intelligence algorithms that take decisions on behalf of human beings. Because those AI algorithms is nothing personal. They go rogue on you. And actually, I think the AI algorithms are being deployed against you and me. Nothing personal, right? They're just following the traffic that comes to your site and comes to my site, looking at a semantic parsing of the language used, about COVID. And ultimately, the AI sends an instruction to Facebook to shut you down, right? So I can guarantee you that 99.99% of the people in Facebook don't even know why you've been shut down.
Well, I don't know why. They wouldn't tell me.
No,
They
exactly,
just send this message. First, they said that there was a login from some other computer. Was that you? And it said New York, so I said, I guess it was me. I mean, there's a lot of computers here. Last night, I think I tried to log into Facebook from one of the on-air computers and it didn't work. So I presumed it might have just been a security setting thing, and I had to go through this process of sending them my driver's license, David. They said, send us a picture of your ID. And then when I did that, you can see it right back there. It says JG DL 2020. I just snapped a picture of my driver's license and uploaded it. And then it immediately gave me this message. Facebook account disabled because it didn't follow our community guidelines standards. This decision can't be reversed, David. The permanence of that is quite impressive. But I mean, again, David, I'm sorry again to derail, but this is kind of breaking news here in our own little microcosm. But Facebook is its own community, right? Like, I mean, I said there are certain people on there who I really don't have any contact with other than Facebook. And now I'm a digital pariah from the Facebook society. I'm not allowed in. I'm not allowed to transact business. Facebook has a digital currency coming. You can send payments. Applause, thumbs up. This is the very thing that all those patents are talking about, right?
Well, specifically in the Trump collection or 10 patented devices, this would be the patent that I put under the term SLAP, Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, which is a system and method for creating content such as artificial reality messages at an event, particularly among members on a social network. And in addition to creating an active gallery for an event, messages, audio, and video virtual goods, money, bets, applause, other feedback, and donations can be exchanged. So what they're doing is, in the weeds there are little vermin that don't have the courage to give their own name, that are fake characters, that are sniping away, and that maybe they're rewarded with an Emmy, maybe they're rewarded with a BAFTA, maybe they're rewarded with whatever. And that does represent potentially a great increase in their earning power. I mean, you're in that industry, not me, right? No one's offering me an Emmy, right? But it may,
I guarantee they
well,
won't be offering me one either, David.
right, but they may one day be offering something equally or significantly more important, is that the public at large will understand our message. And that to me is a huge reward. And I think that's the justification that I think you and I both, when we ask or invite for Patreon support, because you and I have warned me, we have been warned that when someone comes along and wants to buy a particular direction for your program to take, you can go off in that direction, and then that prevents you from going in another direction. We can change tack overnight. For example, the news about the Trump infection appeared. My ex called me, and she's anti-Trump, and she's quite happy. But I
Wow.
don't think I mean, I don't care, because
People are
the way
happy.
the prophet.
It's the thing.
Sorry.
Anti-Trump people are happy at the notion that he might die. They're not even
Yes,
satisfied that he not be president anymore. They want him dead. That is a
but
deep perversion of people's minds. I'm sure your
yeah,
ex-wife is
that's the
not.
result of years and years and decades of parallel narratives, which is the principal weapon developed, refined, and perfected by the BBC, the world's most powerful broadcaster, right, with a weekly audience of 500 million people in 50 languages, right? So that's what we're up against. We're up against the BBC, and I've been writing open letters to the chairman of the BBC, Sir David Clementi. Whether he reads them or not, I don't care. And actually, multiple times I've said on your show, Donald Trump should call you up and have you brief him on what's going on. Now, the fact is he hasn't, and I think you would say, well, he's unlikely to do that. But you see, we know a great deal about the Trump interface or cockpit, right, which is the software used by the BBC to drive parallel narratives into the collective conscience of humanity. And a parallel narrative, maybe you could just flip to the logo of the hat, because maybe that will help people. Yeah, so I thought long and hard about this logo, and I wanted it to convey a symbol or an image of what is otherwise very complex. So what I did is I took the logo of a pair of binoculars and I spun one arm of the binoculars round. So now it symbolizes, on the left-hand side, let's say hypothetically, a real character looking down, and I don't quite know what to call it. I've called it a binoscope, some combination of binoculars and telescope, looking at them. And conversely, on the other side, you have, let's say, a fake character looking at us through a fake narrative, right? And what transmits between the fake narrative and the real narrative is an event or news of an event, which might be the particular day on which Facebook shuts you down, right? That is to say, they can place bets on data moving on that bridge between the fake and the real narrative. When I say they, again, it's nothing personal. It might be, what's the difference in time between the North Tower and the South Tower collapsing or being demolished, because they're quite obviously demolished? What's the time of impact of the first plane on the north face of the North Tower, as recorded by Jules and Gédéon Naudet? So on the collage, when you started, you told me, because I didn't recognize them, but they're about 20 years older, I guess. Those are the two brothers who went to the Tisch School of Arts, which is interesting, because on the board of trustees of the Tisch School of Arts is one Barry Diller, right, who I think is
Oh, I
quite
didn't know
interesting.
that.
Didn't I tell? I mean, sorry, I should have told you. I thought you knew.
You know what? When people ask me how was NYU, I liked my friends and everything, but NYU is a giant piece of crap and a super greedy organization. So I can't say that I'm surprised. Yeah, Dean's Counsel, Barry Diller is the chairman and senior executive. You're right, David.
Well, and so going back to this concept of the parallel narrative. So let's say we
Oh,
look at
Alec
any
Baldwin
particular.
is on there too. This is all a bunch of Trump haters.
Exactly, exactly, right. And they control one arm of the parallel narrative, which I believe involves the fake characters and the fake narratives and a great deal of money. And one way of rewarding the people who participate successfully as fake characters is to give them an Emmy, right? And of course, another way of punishing people who might see through this fraud or this scam is to basically sue you for infringement of copyright, even though what you did is very obviously a parody. So now, if we go back to the, sorry, did you want to make a point with these people? You're just checking on
Well,
who's
I'm
in
just
it, right?
looking at them. This is the producer of Saturday Night Live that's relentlessly put out, parodies and things about Trump, which of course they're allowed to do. But it's just interesting that,
Martin Scorsese, that's a well-known name, isn't it?
yeah, Oliver Stone, Martin Scorsese. I mean, this is it's NYU. A lot of people went. Casey Wasserman, he's come up in the conversations with Bishop Gators.
Right. Now, let me just throw an open challenge to alumni of any alma mater. I mean, most people, I believe, would take pride or would like to have pride in the integrity of their alma mater. So I went to Cambridge. I'm proud that I went to Cambridge. I got a wonderful qualification, a wonderful education, if you will, and I was taught about intuitive problem solving. And I don't know how you can put that in writing or in letters, but it's basically, as an engineer, getting within the problem. If you're building a bridge, you get inside the bridge in your mind and you pretend to be a strut or a member or whatever it was, and you see if you can take the load without collapsing. And that's the great gift and the great barrier between artificial intelligence and human beings. And there's a guy called Aaron Sloman, who's a guru in the artificial intelligence world, quoting Alan Turing. He said that Turing said, uh, computers can be attributed with mathematical ingenuity, but not mathematical intuition. And that's what you and I have, and that's what their AI algorithms do not have. And let me give you an example very specifically, and I had to go back because I didn't attend that particular presentation. Back to that 1981 conference, there was a presentation on autopilot, right, from people representing the Rand Corporation. This is 1981. And I've gone back and looked at it, and horrifyingly, that's a clumsy word, they had the bright idea of programming autopilots with artificial intelligence algorithms such that the autopilot would take decisions that would allow the plane to avoid collisions. Now, think how scary that is. So on 911, there were, I
Well,
think,
we've sort of
5,000.
seen that. The autopilot, not the autopilot, but the MCAS system is using some form of artificial intelligence to take control of the plane. And we've heard pilots are objecting to that, obviously.
Well, obviously, because those artificial intelligence algorithms, A, they can be hacked, and B, they're not human, so they can't cope with the full range of events that might take place. So, for example, during an exercise, Vigilant Guardian, on the 10th to the 12th of September in 2001, a number of planes were hijacked electronically through this company Maxar that was in Richmond, British Columbia, and that's a very important address. We'll come back to that. And the interceptor planes that were sent to tag them, and historically, the United States Air Force, when warned that there was a plane errant by 5 minutes of azimuth or 5 minutes of time at a particular waypoint, the air traffic controller would contact his or her supervisor, who would contact the nearest Air Force base, that would send up an interceptor that can fly, I don't know, double the speed of sound, and they would get to eyeball the errant aircraft and actually look into the cockpit to determine what the hell was going on, whether the pilot was dead, whether there were, for example, box cutter wielding Muslims at the controls, or whether the plane was being flown by technology, i.e. by an autopilot. But not one of the planes that was hijacked on 911 was intercepted by a United States Air Force jet or interceptor. And that's very interesting because on May the 3rd of 2001,
Sorry, David, didn't they claim that they shot it down in Pennsylvania?
Of course they claimed it, but it wasn't shot down, right? Anyway, but you're right. But none of the planes was hijacked, was intercepted by, as far as we know, right? Now, what that means is they had created an artificial intelligence program, let's say called Autopilot, built by Maxar, that was to deploy during the exercise, such that what the American Air Force had been told was, don't worry, stand down your interceptor jets, because we now have the technology to take a plane over through its autopilot and land it safely. And they'd rehearsed that on the 1st and 2nd of June. And so the ultimate fake character, of course, is on the front of the briefing document for Amalgam Virgo, and it's Osama bin Laden. So when they say they didn't expect or didn't know what Osama bin Laden was up to, he was already identified, not knowingly by them, as a fake character. So the public should have known if they were looking at this. Now, whether it was prepared after the event is immaterial. The narrative for the exercise on the 1st and 2nd of June had been written and prepared and organized, I believe, by General Alexander Haig. Right? So when on September the 11th, at 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 minutes before the second plane hits the south face of the South Tower, he's asked on Fox News, CF Hope Hicks, because Hope Hicks worked for Fox, interestingly enough. Right? So on Fox News, he's asked, who does he think, this is General Alexander Haig is behind it, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and the guy who went to China 4 months after Tiananmen Square and chatted up the Chinese and said business as usual, right? This guy is, I believe, he's dead, is a traitor to the United States. Yeah, General Alexander Haig. So he says, well, I don't want to speculate, I don't have the information, but he does have the information because he must have had a role in writing or developing the script that was put out through the BBC's parallel narrative supply service. So 2 minutes later, a plane, right? And whether, some people say it's CGI and you've looked into that, etc. The important thing is not to debate what it is that hit the south face of the South Tower, but the message that was sent to the public. Because the message that was sent to the public, as I look at that, there's this plane or shadowy figure that's moving across on the lower part of the images that have been sent, and it goes right through the building. So here, basically, the train hits the buffers, or whatever you like to call it, because at some point the fake narrative has to correlate with the real narrative. And what the BBC and the government apologists and the scumbag that are trying to shut you down are trying to say, you can't question that. It had to be Osama bin Laden who did it. But in
that's
fact,
the thing. The new policies, David, disallow even questioning anything. You can get thrown out of the society, the digital society, for even questioning.
And so what and I don't want to sound arrogant here, but what you and I can do, perhaps uniquely, and if you wouldn't mind going back to the logo, right, so I can clarify it with the language. So CAPTAIN is actually an acronym that stands for Character and Parallel Tracking through AI or Artificial Intelligence Narratives. Hawkins is me, because I claim to be an authority in this, having been looking at this for 40 years and having exposed the dangers of letting computers take decisions for human beings based on the artificial algorithm. And symbolically, what you've got on the left-hand side is a real character with a real narrative. And on the right-hand side, you've got a fake character and a fake narrative. And at a certain event, like the death of, let's say, Peter Gansey Jr., the fire chief of the fire department of New York, or John O'Neill, the head of security at the World Trade Center who had investigated the USS Cole bombing, or Sean Rooney with Aon Corporation at the top of the South Tower, or Rosemary Smith, the switchboard operator for Sidley Austin, who was the only member of staff of Sidley Austin, and they had 600 people in that building, who died. And I'm saying it's highly likely, or just as likely as anything else, that someone with a Glock walked up behind her and put a couple of bullets in the back of her head, because she was the switchboard operator and she would have seen the behavior of the switchboard, which presumably had a program to alert everyone to evacuate the building,
Sorry,
was
David.
suddenly.
Let me refocus you on John O'Neill, because we've heard a lot about Rosemary, but John O'Neill is somebody we haven't spoken about enough. Because although I've heard about him before, thinking about him in this context, particularly with regard to the USS Cole, let's just talk about this guy for a second. John Patrick O'Neill, he was a counterterrorism expert who worked as a special agent in charge in the FBI. And in 1995, he began to intensely study the roots of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And he assisted in the capture of Ramzi Youssef, who was the leader of that plot. Well, perhaps he was the leader of that plot. Subsequently learned of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and investigated the 1996 Khobar Towers bombing, which looks remarkably similar to the Murrah building bombing in terms of how the whole front of the building is ripped off, very dramatic. And he was also involved in investigating the USS Cole bombing, as you just told us. But if these are connected events, certainly whoever is behind them would be motivated to make sure John P. O'Neill was inside the World Trade Center when it was destroyed. The other thing that's very interesting is that the destruction of the World Trade Center, David, it was very much like a plane crash in terms of an assassination method, in as much as when a plane crashes, we don't have an individual investigation into the death of each person. It's not like a murder investigation. If somebody walked up to this guy, John O'Neill, on the street and shot him in the head, there'd be an intense investigation into who he was, who shot him, why he shot him, the bullet that killed him. If he's one of 3,000 in a building, his death isn't going to get investigated at all. And as a matter of fact, in this case, the whole incident doesn't get investigated.
Absolutely, and there's no autopsy. And you see, that's the weakest point in the conspiracy, is the time of an event. It doesn't have to be a fatal event. It can be an event that is predicted as to when Facebook will contact you and tell you that you're no longer on Facebook.
Well, don't you find it strange, David, that happened just minutes before our show? Could it have possibly been somebody prompting Facebook right here on a Friday morning, hoping that would happen to upset me so we'd talk about it here on the show? Very coincidental that this person would send me a threat via email over something so ridiculous. That's a fake narrative.
Of course it is, and it's coordinated and synchronized, right? And timing is absolutely essential. If we just go back to World War II, when the Germans switched off their radio beacons to prevent them being used as homing for the British bombing raids, the BBC switched the RCA technology in at the same frequency within a millisecond. I mean, this is extraordinary technology. This was a 1 megawatt transmitter, so the most powerful medium wave transmitter in the world at the time, made by RCA. That by 1998, as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, RCA GB 1929 would become Serco through a management buyout and then an initial public offering structured by Wilbur Ross, the man who didn't want to talk about Serco in the patent office when you met him in that extraordinary encounter. So these guys, they're panicking. I can tell you, I just feel it in my...
That's what our viewers just said in the comments, David. That's interesting that you would make that statement. Chicky Rogue says he or she thinks that they realize the debates went worse than they thought, and they're battening down the hatches, trying to just really take it home here in the last couple of weeks. It does seem coordinated, right, David? I mean, multiple attacks on the YouTube channel incapacitate that. I think the president of television might be feeling pretty stupid right now because he's really gotten himself into a bit of a legal bind, and we're going to see how that goes. But they don't want it to be too obvious, right? So it's all these little attacks from each side kind of closing the walls in.
Well, little attacks, you see, let's just go back. And the beauty of now, I think, of this analysis of the binoculoscope, I mean, whoever wants to call it by a different name, the two arms of the binocular, where one is pointing in the opposite direction. So they look at us as we look at them. So they're trying to judge what they can do to stop us looking at them. And when I say we're not just looking, we're observing. We've analyzed now the nature of the conspiracy. and how old it is. It at least goes back to World War II. But its modern form, I believe it emerged at that Ichkai conference at UBC that I attended in 1981, because there you have two extraordinary papers. One is the autopilot paper presented by people with the RAND Corporation that floated the idea of decentralizing intelligence to individual aircraft and letting the aircraft avoid collisions. Now, how dumb is that? Because in a particular case of a hijacking, you want your interceptor jets to get there, right? And eyeball what's going on in the cockpit, right? So the other one is this character tracking to understand narratives. And I think I pointed out with Skype, this could be reversed. It could be narrative tracking to understand characters. So if you look at this COVID narrative that we're getting about we have to mask up and keep the 6 foot distance, that tells us a great deal about the characters that are driving it. Now, for example, Elmer Davis, who's the guy on your collage at the front, he was head of the Information War Office during World War II, and he said the way to propagandize the public is to inject the propaganda into the public through entertainment media.
Then he appears in The Day the Earth Stood Still playing a newsman, really stretching the boundaries of what is a fake narrative and what is a real narrative.
And Angelina Jolie appears as executive producer of the BBC's My World program to teach children how to recognize fake news. I mean, I rest my case. What does she know about recognizing fake news, in particular with regard to COVID, right? So sometimes my head spins. She's a real character playing a fake character, right? And on the other side of that channel is a guy who did have COVID-19, right, who was murdered or killed, depending on your point of view. And his name is George Floyd, right?
Wow.
So back to Angelina Jolie, a well-known character. Incidentally, the film that I understand she sort of made her reputation, interestingly, was called Hackers. Now, isn't that interesting? Because we are surrounded by hackers, some competent, some incompetent. And as I keep making the point, is these guys who maybe think of themselves as ethical hackers, the big problem is, are they competent ethical hackers? That is to say, once they've hacked inside a system, like the Federal Bridge through the Trump template or interface, have they left a door open, right? So someone else can come in as they come out and stage a parallel narrative attack, as was allegedly the case with the bombing of the East Africa embassies, the USS Cole attack in Aden Harbor, and the demolition of the Twin Towers, where I believe they were betting on the body count of the firefighters, 343. And I've always been troubled by the kind of mixture of brutality and ruthlessness and lack of empathy and precision. So, for example,
of any of these attacks, you mean?
Well, let me just take as an example. The second plane that hit the south face of the South Tower, and I believe Gideon Node was around the other side of the block, so he caught the impact of the plane on the south face of the South Tower, while his brother caught the impact of the north face on the north face of the North Tower, right? But that second impact was 16 minutes later than the first impact, but that plane had left 16 minutes late. Now, what happened if it had left on time? Were the AI algorithms programmed so that these planes were intended to hit the north face of the North Tower and the south face of the South Tower simultaneously? And the American brain, and I'm not being insulting, basically would have shut down. It's a bit like the attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. How do you get your head around an attack on that scale, on that level of sophistication, where there is no way this clown straddling a yak in a cave in Afghanistan could possibly have orchestrated that with the degree of military precision that was necessary? Go ahead.
We've been through that many times. I want to keep you on Angelina Jolie for a moment, David, because of all the people that you could choose to educate children, why would they choose Angelina Jolie? I mean, a child won't know Angelina Jolie from any other person. Angelina Jolie is primarily recognized as a famous actress, And I guess she's an activist and all that kind of thing. But she's also a recovering heroin addict. She's been married many times, been accused of breaking up marriages. She is the daughter of John Voight, and they have a terrible relationship. There's a lot of reasons why you might not want Angelina Jolie educating your children, setting aside the fact that, as far as we know, she doesn't have a master's degree in education or any qualifications to educate children in anything. David, do you know who else is an expert in matters of fake news?
Adam Sharp.
Self-proclaimed. He appears regularly as a noted expert and speaker on digital communications, marketing, political affairs, and strategy, and issues related to fake news and misinformation. So he's an expert, he's a noted expert on issues related to fake news and misinformation. Does that mean he's an expert on injecting those things or detecting those things? Or certainly if you're an expert on it, you could do anything with it.
Well, let's stay with Angelina Jolie. So obviously she has no qualifications to teach children how to recognize fake news, whereas you and I do, right? Because you know how fake news can be masked to look realistic from a cinematographic point of view. And I know how fake news can be detected by ground truthing. And I'm an expert in ground truthing. I'm probably the only person with 40 years of experience in artificial intelligence that's actually built a system with ground truthing algorithms embedded in it that doesn't say to an interpreter, basically in the oil industry, you're right or you're wrong. It says you're allowed to have your hypothesis. It's a bit like 911. If your hypothesis is correct, that is to say, if a Boeing passenger aircraft went across the Pentagon lawn at 500 miles an hour and 15 feet elevation, from our knowledge of aerodynamics of the plane would shake itself to bits through what's known as ground air turbulence. Therefore, you're allowed to have your hypothesis it's a passenger aircraft. You're allowed to have your hypothesis that the COVID-19 virus is being spread through droplets breathed out by human beings, right? Now, that's either right or wrong. If it were true that the COVID-19 virus was being spread by a patient zero, and that's the name that Dr. Hannah Fry gives her to herself in that Contagion exclamation mark, right? She plays a character which she describes as a patient zero, and she's wandering around Hazelmere, which is a little town in South England, and there's a bunch of volunteers, right, who have all agreed to carry one of those GPS systems on their mobile phones, where the AI algorithms determine from the proximity and the duration of contact whether or not the volunteer has been infected with the virus. But that's a fake narrative, and she's playing a fake character. So, of course, there is a real Dr. Hannah Fry, right? But the character that she played in that documentary is a fake character.
But David, just like with Elmer Davis, she might be playing a fake character, but it's her.
Yes, right. But now what she's conveyed to the people, and God help Angelina Jolie in communicating this to the children, is that the COVID virus can be extended by people who are coming into a certain close contact as measured by the algorithms that were programmed, I believe, with the help of Neil Ferguson, the head of the COVID-19 response team at Imperial College. But this is the man who infected Boris, right? So you've got this interplay between fake narratives, fake characters, with you and I and our listeners and the children and grandchildren that we're associated with. They're stuck in the fake narrative and they're being injected with fake news, and it's extremely difficult for them to untangle it without the services, I believe, of people like yourself and me. Right? I mean, this guy is a clown. He's a charlatan, right? Mm-hmm. He was the man who put the algorithms together that predicted the fatalities associated with foot and mouth disease in 2001, right? And they slaughtered 7 million cattle and sheep, right, in the UK to prevent the spread of foot and mouth. Many people believe the foot and mouth disease was actually leaked out of the Porton Down bioweapons research laboratory, right? And many and a significant number of farmers committed suicide,
Because they lost
right? So
everything.
I
They
don't
lost
know
their
that we want
livelihood.
to.
But sorry, David, real quick. That is the same kind of fake news narrative. Farmers committing suicide, people losing their livelihood, buying up those farms, etc. It's the same kind of thing we hear about happening right now. And I just want to share some information with you for a moment, if I can. We're just about 15 minutes away from starting our sponsor exclusive segment on subscribestar.com and /reverse CSI, patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and Subscribestar and Patreon /crowdsource the truth. David, our audience is alerting me of several things. First of all, Angelina Jolie is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I did not know that, and that is troubling. I believe the Council on Foreign Relations is very closely associated with the CIA. Angelina Jolie has been in a couple of movies, like you said, Hackers. She was in something called Salt, where she was some kind of secret agent. I don't trust this Council on Foreign Relations at all. And I want to get your input on that. But before we go over to that, people have been throughout the show talking about something you and I have discussed previously, these doomsday planes that were seen flying over the East Coast and the West Coast. People had presumed that this was related to the announcement that Donald Trump had tested COVID positive. By the way, that doesn't even mean that he's sick, right? That just means that they did the test and he's got the virus in him. But Washington Times is reporting that the two doomsday plane flights overnight off both U.S. coasts were pre-planned and had nothing to do with President Trump's positive coronavirus test. This is the Boeing E-6B, David.
Yeah, well, let's just go back to the Council on Foreign Relations, and let's encourage people to start thinking in terms of this parallel narrative attack orchestrated by the BBC since World War II, historically using the technology from RCA until 1988/1989, after a management buyout and initial public offering arranged, I believe, by Wilbur Ross at NM Rothschild and Sons Limited, where it became Serco. And I believe the BBC and Serco, together with Maxar, that was a company founded by John McDonald in Richmond, BC, kitty corner, I suggest, to the headquarters of Phantom Secure. And that's, again, no coincidence, right? So if you go back to the founding of Serco from RCAGB 1929, I believe the BBC and Serco then began an orchestrated drive towards parallel narrative attacks that was initiated by the destruction of Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie in Scotland. So now we need to follow who were the fake characters and fake narratives associated with the attack on Pan Am 103. Well, how about Robert David Steele? Not Robert David Steele, Oliver Buck Revell.
Buck Revell, yeah.
Right. Number 4, I think, at the FBI, a specialist in counterterrorism and counterintelligence. He runs onto the tarmac at Heathrow Airport and takes his son and daughter-in-law off the tarmac before they would have boarded Pan Am 103. We don't need to be rocket scientists to realize this is foreknowledge. Why would you do that?
But the parallel narrative, of course, is that Gaddafi and terrorists from Libya bombed it, when in fact, it seems much more likely that if they knew that and didn't want... So really, if this were the real narrative, if this guy who was basically like Andrew McCabe level at the FBI at the time, if he knew the plane was going to blow up and the FBI was doing what we expect them to do, wouldn't they stop the whole entire plane, take everybody off of it, and check the plane for a bomb instead of just taking his son and daughter off? It seems to me, David, they wanted the plane to blow up so that they could issue a fake narrative that says that Gaddafi blew it up and that this would give a pretext for a war against Libya. The United States could go in there and take gold and oil and all kinds of resources. But that's a parallel narrative. And we're getting very close to the end of our segment here, David. We're going to continue this conversation on our sponsor exclusive segment on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You know, David, with the main Jason Goodman YouTube channel incapacitated until November 18th, and the Emmys and other people involved in lawsuits continually agitating, and now with Facebook being taken out, and then only moments later, this cowardly, wretched little fake narrative, fake name, phantom character Weasel issuing a direct threat. I mean, certainly if he wasn't involved in taking down the Facebook channel, he's certainly trying to make it appear that he was. And it's really interesting. This guy's been agitating for something that is obviously a fake narrative. I already told him the information he's asking me for has already been publicly released. But if he wants to keep asking me for it, I'll give it to him if he sends me 1 Bitcoin. Because I don't want to deal with this guy. But he refuses to, I've given him the way to get it, and he doesn't want that. So he wants to keep pushing a fake narrative that I'm hiding something. So I don't really understand what's going on there. But
now, before it goes to the next stage of the show, say something with this Oliver Buck-Revel. So now I think we can start with our audience, and I really encourage the people who have supported us in the past to get out there and help us fight this shutdown, this cyber shutdown of the various outlets by which and so it's absolutely vital that there's a multiplier effect by all of the people who believe we're doing something useful, right? Yes. And so let me look at an Oliver Buck-Revel, and I'll extend that into the next part of the show. So the important thing about Oliver Buck-Revel is, what is his narrative subsequent to taking his son and daughter-in-law off the tarmac at Heathrow before they would otherwise have got on Pan Am 103? He went on, number 4, I think, at the FBI. In 1994, he left the FBI and started an operation up in Vancouver, right? I think 97 or 98 it was registered. It was called Images Technologies, and it does face recognition, right, of people as they move through welfare, hospitals, schools, customs posts, etc., etc. So he is involved in the tracking of people through some combination of facial recognition or ankle bracelets or GPS. So he can select targets for bankruptcy, elimination, or whatever. All the people, for example, on Pan Am 103, that's his career. He's, whether you call it or not, he's a fake character in a fake narrative that we need to drag out into the sunlight. He should be, whether it's arrested or not, waterboarded to find out what he knew about Pan Am 103, right? Because it looks to me like that was an orchestrated and coordinated operation by the BBC, the world's most powerful parallel narrative broadcaster. And these are parallel narrative attacks, and they extend from World War II right through to the present with this COVID-19 attack on the President of the United States. And if we don't wake up, President Trump will be so disabled, or potentially disabled, he cannot participate in the election in November. Whoa. And then all bets are off.
Wow. Imagine if that's what they have planned.
What happens if he gets really sick?
I don't think that's going to happen, David, but it's an interesting thought to contemplate. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Trump will recover without any illness. He's just got the virus that's been, tested for. But you're right. This is a parallel narrative, David. Actually, the whole attack on the Crowdsource the Truth network of social media properties is a parallel narrative. The narrative in these lawsuits that, what's his name, generous hacker, or what the hell is the term that he uses? The ethical hacker. He claims that I'm, attacking him. I didn't even know who he was until he started issuing threats against me, just like this anonymous idiot who issues threats. I mean, any person who has a real problem should present themselves, present the problem, and we can work it out. All this other stuff, it's parallel narratives, David. See, the Facebook thing, they want you to think we violated the community guidelines. But if they keep changing the community guidelines saying, well, you can't question public health policy, and they keep changing public health policy, like suddenly the governor can just take over and tell every business to close, and have these powers that would normally be associated with a king or some kind of, all-powerful being, rather than an elected official who has checks and balances against his power by other elected officials. But we're running over time here, David. It's become more important than ever right now for our viewers to share this video, for them not only to become sponsors on subscribestar.com/reversecsi, patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. They've got to share this video, hopefully on Facebook, because nobody can see us there now, and elsewhere. Even if you've never shared one of our videos before, please take the time, share this video with just one person, encourage them to sponsor the show or just watch the show, and let people know. I have a feeling, David, we may not be far from a moment where all social media platforms for Crowdsource the Truth will be taken, stricken, and kept away. And it might be just the right timing for the creation of this standalone video server platform that I'm working on, hopefully to be done in the next couple of weeks. People will be able to see our sponsor exclusive shows there, and we'll remain here on public social media for as long as we can. David, I'll see you in 3 minutes on the sponsor exclusive segment.
Thank you, Jason. You're a courageous man.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you over there.